Hello, everyone. Nice
Sofia.
after we didn't meet last week. I'm Sofia Freudenstein. I am the Maharat intern at ASBI, and welcome to our Parsha class where we look at the Parsha, and we also look at a passage of Gemara and see how a passage of Gemara that quotes our Parsha is somehow able to teach us something new about the Parsha entirely. So that's the method that we have been using so far. I think it's been working okay so far, and we're going to continue pushing it today. Thank you, Barry. Okay. As usual, I'm going to post the source sheet for us as a link in the chat, and also I will share my screen. Okay, first I'll put it in here. Okay, there, and now I will share. Okay, can everyone see? We're good?
Okay.
Amazing. Okay, so this week's Parsha is Parsha Utro. It is a Parsha named after one of the main characters in this Parsha, Yitro, Moshe's father-in-law. He comes for a visit after hearing about the great success of Moshe and the splitting of the sea and the defeating of the Pharaoh and the Egyptians. And he comes to kind of check Moses out. I mean, I don't know exactly what a typical father-in-law, son-in-law relationship is like, so maybe a little bit of a routine check is expected. But it seems like Yitro is also like very fascinated and amazed by what God has done for the Jewish people, and also probably like many father-in-law and son-in-law relationships, like has a little bit of unsolicited advice for his son-in-law, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Is like what exactly the advice is about specifically how Moshe judges. We're going to look at a Gemara source that talks about the power of judgment and see maybe an interesting connection to another part of Tanakh that the Gemara brings in order to teach us a little bit about what exactly does it mean to judge other people. Okay, so let's start off with the Tanakh sources as we usually do. Okay, so this is from the beginning of the Parsha. I skipped the part where Yitro comes to the Israelite camp and he says, "Oh my goodness, like Moshe, so many amazing things happen to you and your people. I love it. I want to celebrate with you all." I skipped that and I skipped to now the part where Yitro gives some advice to Moshe. All right, so let's start at verse 13. I'll read the Hebrew and then explain. ויהי ממחרת וישב משה לשפוט את העם ויעמוד העם על משה מן הבוקר עד הערב. So the next day after Yitro comes, Moshe sits down to give judgment, to judge the nation, and the people. It's interesting here, Vayamod ha'am, it says like the nation stood, but it's also Vayamod is in the singular, so it's like interesting that the nation is like a single entity. Stood al Moshe, about Moses, like next to Moshe, in front of Moshe, from morning until evening. So lots of that. Oh yes, Audrey, here, I'll paste the chat again for you. Okay, great. Okay, so this is the language, we're gonna notice this language coming up about like it's a little weird. Like it makes sense that probably what it was is that the nation stood in front of Moshe, but then like the grammar is a little weird in how to actually talk about that. Okay. Vayarchotein Moshe et kol asher hu oseh la'am vayomer ma hadavar hazeh asher ata oseh la'am madua ata yoshev levadecha v'chol ha'am nitzav alecha min haboker ad arev. So the father-in-law of Moshe, Yitro, comes up to Moshe and sees everything that he has done for them, watching all this judging happen, and says, "What is this thing that you're doing for the nation? Why are you sitting alone and judging? And the whole nation stands in front of you from morning until evenings." This is a nice reminder, right? We don't have to all be carrying the burden ourselves. He's saying to Moshe, you can spread it out a bit. Maybe you'll get a little bit of burnout if you're the one taking on all of this power. Okay. But Moshe says, I am someone that I'm the person that people come to for when the nation wants to lidrosh Elohim, to seek out God, they come to me for that. Okay. Ki yelehem davar ba elai v'shafatati bein ish uvein re'ehu v'ho'adti et chukei el ha'elohim ve'et torotav. If there's an issue that they bring to me, I judge it. I judge between one person and another person. Usually, right, there would be like a dispute between two people. And I provide for them the rules of God and also God's Torah. This is also interesting chronologically, right? Like this is actually before Matan Torah. The Torah is given at Har Sinai in chapter 20. And this is happening in verse 18. And so we could say like, oh, well, like Rashi says that there isn't necessarily a chronological order to how the Torah works, but it seems here that this is a time before the Torah exists in the hands of Bnei Israel, and Bnei Israel just don't know what to do. So they're just like outsource, they just like go to Moshe, who then like is able to be the conduit between him and God, and is able to provide these answers of what to do, instead of saying, oh, my ox gored this other person's ox. Now, now we'd open up Masechet Bava Kama and look at the Gemara there. And we also have Sukkim that actually talk about it in next week's Parsha. It seems like Moshe just like took the answer straight to God, and then they got the answer, which is like an interesting idea about like, how did Torah or law work at this time? Okay. Vayomer chotin Moshe elav lo tov hadavar asher ata aseh. Yitro says, nope, this is not a good thing that you are doing. Navol tivol gam ata gam ha'am hazeh asher imach yichaved mimcha hadavar lo tuchal asohu levadecha. And so he says, you will surely wear yourself out. This is the burnout point. If you take on all of these judgments of Bnei Yisrael, you're going to wear yourself out, and these people will also get tired by that. This task is heavy for you. You will not be able to do it on your own. So it could feel a little bit invasive, like, I don't know, father-in-law stepping in and kind of sharing this unsolicited advice, but there's some truth to it. It's a lot of people, right? We have 600,000 men. So imagine like times 2 plus of like also the women, the children. There's issues to be solved, and Moshe is the only one dealing with them. Okay, so now here's where the advice comes. Ata shma v'koli iyatzcha vayihi Elohim imach. Heyei ata la'am mul ha'Elohim v'hebeta ata et hadvarim el ha'Elohim. Now listen to me, oh son-in-law Moshe. I will give you counsel, and God be with you. You represent the people before God. You bring the disputes before God. והזהרת אתהם את החוקים ואת התורות והודעת להם את הדרך ילכו בה ואת המעשה אשר יעשון. And enjoin upon them the laws and the teaching, and make known to them the ways they're supposed to go and the practices they're supposed to follow. ואתה תחזה מכל העם אנשי חיל יראי אלוהים אנשי אמת שונאי בצע ושמת עליהם שרי אלפים ושרי מאות שרי חמישים ושרי עשרות. Now you go discern, you look throughout the entire nation for people of valor, almost like soldiers here, Anshe Chayil, people who fear God, truthful people who hate taking bribes, and put them to be like the heads of the thousands, heads of the hundreds, heads of the 50s, and the heads of the tens. So the idea is that like we're going to distribute power. So it's not just you. We'll have someone who's in charge of 1,000 people, someone who's in charge of 100, of 50, of 10. We're spreading, we're putting more checks and balances in. Okay. ושפטו את העם בכל עת, והיה כל הדבר הגדול יביאו אליך, וכל הדבר הקטן ישפטוהם, והקל מעליך ונשאו איתך. So you will then, they will also judge the nation in every situation, and every big thing they'll bring to you, right? They're going to set up a hierarchy, a structure, to make sure that when an issue is too difficult, that then the sarim of the heads of the tens, the heads of the 50s, hundreds, thousands, they can send it up to you, send it up the system. And every small thing that it's like you don't need to necessarily be burdened by it, and then these other leaders will carry the burden for you. Im et hadavar hazeh ta'aseh v'tzivacha Elohim v'yachalta amod v'gam kol ha'am hazeh al mekomo yavo b'shalom. And if you do this, and God so commands you, you will be able to bear up, and all these people too will go home unwearied, right? They won't feel like there's a power structured failure, right? Because like the idea is that they will get answers to their questions. There won't be a backlog. This is a great way to do it, to set up a system as opposed to Moshe being the only person. Moshe says, that's great. I like this idea, and then does what Yitro recommends. So I think this is a really interesting story. Yitro is not formally Jewish. And here he is like reforming the whole way of this, like how not just law is distributed, but how Torah is distributed. It's like interesting how the term Torah is used here, right? Because we said like Torah hasn't been given yet because it's not Matan Torah yet, it's before Har Sinai. And yet like every single legal dispute that comes to Moshe, he has to like ask God for what the Torah is on that and share it with them. So it's interesting that like Yitro, who is he's not just a non-Jew, he's the Kohen Midian, he's a Midianite priest, is like the one coming in to come reform things, and so that seems really interesting, and also I think the idea of like what is good judgment is interesting here, right? Like we could think it's best to have an immediate conduit between God and Bnei Yisrael for it to be one person, but to recognize that Moshe is also a person and that it might be too big for him to carry. That doesn't have to be seen as a minimizing of authority to have more people appointed to come kind of take care of the issue, but that it's a helpful way to streamline the process, and to recognize that there are like big things that people come to Moshe for and little things, and like we can have other people involved. So I think it's a fascinating interaction. I think it often gets like overshadowed by Matan Torah, right? Because like Matan Torah is the big part of this parsha. But I think it's a really interesting discussion. I think there's like a lot of for us to think about, like in our workspaces, in our homes, like where there are hierarchies, about what does it look like to like make sure one doesn't get burnt out and also like get the best judgment possible. So what I want to do now is I want to look at a Gemara that quotes a line from this section, and it's going to teach us a little bit about what the power of judgment is like, and I'm hoping that will open up a discussion for us about what we think judgment is. So let's go to the Talmud sources. So this is from Masechet Shabbat at the beginning. I'm trying to think if we've done Masechet Shabbat before. Definitely not as much. We often do Sanhedrin in this Parsha class, which is interesting. But here, even though we're talking about judging, we're talking about Masechet Shabbat because we're going to be talking about Kiddush on a Friday night. And you'll see how that all ties in together. And so let's get to it. All right, I'll read in the English for the sake of simplicity. Speaking of judgment, the Gemara relates that Rav Ami and Rav Asi would sit and study between the pillars beneath the study hall. So now this is like an interesting, like, I think it's a beautiful image. It's not just like that they were like, Rav Ami and Rav Asi were like formally sitting in the Beit Midrash at a desk, you know, that they were like standing, relaxing, leaning on like the pillars of the Beit Midrash. It's a known phenomenon within the Gemara that like the Beit Midrash, like the physical Beit Midrash, is often like a symbol for like the foundations of all rabbinic Judaism. Like there's a story of Lo B'Shemaim, the Torah is not in heaven, and then like the walls of the Beit Midrash crack, and it's not just that like they're the walls, but it's a symbol of like all of Torah Shebaal Peh, of the oral Torah. So here, like I think it's like a very playful image that like, I don't know, Rav Ami and Rav Asi are just like sitting and studying between the pillars. I don't know, it feels kind of informal. They did sit. That was like also how they used to learn, like in Babylon and also in ancient like Israel at the time. But I don't know, to me it feels like it's not the same kind of formality that I often think about, like, I don't know, like the university or like the academy now. So I think that's an interesting image. And each and every hour they would knock on the bolt on the door and say, if there's someone who has a case that requires judgment, let him enter and come before us. So not only were they like sitting and learning all the time, they were always ready to accept real life cases of application of what they were learning. And they would just come knock on the door. Okay. The Gemara also relates that Rav Chisda and Rabba bar Rav Huna would sit in judgment all day and their hearts would grow weak from hunger. So this is another interesting image. Rav Chisda and Rabba bar Rav Huna, they took judgment so seriously that kind of like Moshe we saw before, they'd sit all day and have judgment, but so much so that like they would not even eat lunch. They would like want to have to deal with every single case, which could be seen as like a great act of piety, right? That like this is what they care about. This is also like what is like soul sustaining and nourishing for them. But also, you know, they should probably eat. And in light of the Yitro point about burnout, like it's also probably good to take care of ourselves. Therefore, Rav Chia bar Rav from Difti taught them a braita with regard to the verse. And the next day, and Moshe sat to judge the people, and the people stood over Moshe from the morning until the evening. So they take this pasuk that we looked at the beginning of our learning together. And remember, we were talking about the weirdness of the grammar. It's Vayamod Ha'am, the nation as an entity in the singular masculine, stands all Moshe, like on Moshe. So we're taking that verse and thinking, okay, what are we going to learn about it? Does it end your mind that Moshe would sit and judge all day long? If so, when was his Torah study accomplished? Rather, surely the verse is coming to tell you, any judge who judges a true judgment truthfully, that's a very hard sentence to say, okay, even if he sits in judgment only 1 hour, the verse describes to him as if he became a partner to the Holy One, blessed be he, in the act of creation, as by means of a true judgment, he upholds the world. That's the Meiri's understanding of this, who's a Rishon, medieval commentator. Okay, so what do we see here? I'm asking a somewhat like pedantic, funny question of like, well, if they're judging all day, when are they going to learn Torah? We have to learn Torah, right? So, okay, that seems like a somewhat like, I wouldn't say silly, but like, yeah, it seems like a semantic question, but really we're going to get to like a deeper point about what judgment is. What it's telling you instead is that judgments and doing judgment well, truthfully, is a way of actually becoming like a partner with God in creation of the world, which is really powerful. So let's figure out like why they said that. Okay. This conclusion is derived by means of a verbal analogy, Xera Shava. We have seen this before in our class. Xera Shava is when you have two different verses in Tanakh, and they have the same word. And so a rule that we have from one, or the context we have from one, we can apply to the other. That's an exegetical method that the Gemara uses. So here's our Xera Shava. It is written here in our favorite pasuk, and the people stood over Moshe from the morning until the evening. And it is written there in the act of creation, and it was evening and it was morning one day. So then we have an explanation. What is the part they're picking up on? Vayi erev, vayi boker, right? Erev, evening, boker, day. Those parts are similar in the sentence. The evening and the part of the morning are considered a whole day. Okay, this is like how the calendar and time works, right? In Jewish law, nighttime is the beginning of the halachic day. So evening and morning is how we measure it. It's supposed to morning and evening. Great. With regard to this issue as well, it is sufficient for the judges to sit in judgment for only part of the day, and there's no need for themselves to starve themselves by sitting in judgment all day. Okay, what do we get from this? They're saying, no worries. Moshe didn't really stand there from morning until evening, evening until morning. He's a person too. He had to be able to sustain himself and eat, and like that's why we got this response to those rabbis, like you don't have to be starving all day. So it seems to be solving a technical issue of like, oh, how is it possible for the judges to stand for that long? But we learned something very powerful about what the nature of judgment is, because we're saying that, oh, the morning until evening thing is somewhat of an exaggeration, but it's coming to bring in a literary parallel to say that being a judge is like being partners with the divine and the creation of days, right? The evening, it was morning one day, by erev by boker yom echad, was the way that in the creation story, God, whenever God creates something that day, that's how they say, and then the day was over and that was completed. So we're learning from that the power of judgment is that one becomes a partner with God. And so another question I have for you all to take to the floor is, what does that mean? What does it mean about judgment? I mean, there are some lawyers here in the room, people who I guess like have thoughts maybe about how judgment is discerned. What is so powerful about law? What springs to mind when thinking that like we are partners in the divine when discerning judgment? What are some thoughts that people have? Sure, Barry, start us off. And then if anyone else wants to share, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, please. I was actually hesitant to raise my hand until I saw if anybody was going to jump in, because that would be good. Well, first of all, I am one of the attorneys, but that is not necessarily a distinguishing factor here, because I'm a Torah student and not a Paskin. We affect participants in the judicial system, affect the lives of the people who come before the judicial system and yield to the process. So complainants, plaintiffs, defendants, respondents, everybody who comes in, judges sitting on the bench, everybody who comes in, the attorneys representing the parties, everybody who comes in has a role to play, and you're affecting people's lives. And it could be just the people before you. It could be as wide as the society that the judicial system affects in jurisdiction that could be affected. In other words, it could be just the one pebble in your finger, or if you drop it in the water, it could be rippled throughout society, right? Somebody, the Supreme Court and the appellate courts and the trial courts are all deciding things that can go global. They can go, beyond their own four corners of the room. So it's basically you're affecting the lives of people and what is creation, but creating life. There's inanimate objects that are affected, but we hear all kinds of stuff in our liturgy and other readings where the elements agree, the skies and the water above the skies and all this kind of thing should rejoice in God and extol God, because God is the God who created them and they're here forever. There's things going on in our world. So we are partners of creation. And we're supposed to affect it to the positive. So there's this list of category of qualities that Yitro suggests to Moshe, at least 3, 4, 5 of them, about the kinds of people that Moshe should be looking for to decide who becomes these over the 10, over the 50, over the 100, over the 1,000, etc. I also have the privilege and the honor of reading a Chumash that has Rashi commentary, so I get these wise, amazing, sometimes brilliant observations that Rashi gives me that go along with this stuff. So it's all, we are partners with God. It seems relevant to me that we are, and the singularity of some of the words we've seen before that goes to when the people are one mind, one heart. We saw this back in Breshit at the time of the Akedah, that Rashi comments to me, and this is where one of the brilliance comes in, that there's verbs, there's words that connote the unity of heart and mind between Abraham and Yitzchak going to the Akedah, that they were of one mind and one heart, participating in this, even though they're playing 2 different severe roles. Like that, we see it as Pharaoh is getting ready to chase us again for the last time, and Pharaoh's horse, or the horse, the chariot, the people, the Egyptians that are going with Pharaoh. There's singular words and phrases that go with them that connote the homogeneity of the hearts and the minds of those people and their cause. So you get these kind of things throughout the Torah from time to time.
Thank you. Thanks, Barry. Okay, so yeah, I think that what I got from what you were saying is, one, the power of judgment. There's like life being created, preserved. That's like a godly thing. And then also, right, like this idea that like they're picking up on the language of the singular, treating the nation like singularly standing up, right? Like we have seen it elsewhere in Tanakh. And yeah, I think that often it's coming to convey something powerful. So thank you.
They're all in it together.
Yeah, they're all invested. Does anyone else want to share any thoughts?
Got a thought about Yitro if we have a chance.
Okay. Well, if you want to share anything else, please go for it. I think what's very interesting about the way the Gemara is talking about what judgment is fascinating. And I think that for me, seeing the correlation of judgment and also like thinking about creation, it also made me think a lot about witnessing, which is where I want to take us. We might think like witnessing, judging, that like seems almost like a dichotomy. Don't witnesses come to then like help with judging? But what I think is really powerful about originally in the Tanakh text, and also I think comes in the Gemara text, is that I think there's a kind of witnessing that the judges do of who comes to them. Witnessing meaning like a kind of seeing or an acknowledging, the way that Moshe feels that he needs to like see and hear everyone's plights, right? It's not just like, oh, we need to get through all these cake courses, but he feels that he needs to address in an authentic, meaningful way every single issue that arises. And that like, I think that's like usually what a true judge is, because I think that being a true good judge is about seeing what is in front of you, witnessing the injustice or the beautiful things that are happening, and then figuring out what to do from there. And there's another time where the creation story and witnessing appears, and like I wonder how this can help us think like a little bit more about what judging is and like what the role of good judgment is. So that's where I want to take us next, and this is in the takeaway section. So this is from the Mishnah Brewer. The Mishnah Brewer is a halachic code or kind of commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is like the main big compendium of halachic code. The first code that came before it, that's like, well, not the first, but probably the most prominent code previously, was the Rambam's Mishnah Torah. The Shulchan Aruch was written by Rabbi Yosef Karo, and it's a shortened consolidation of a lot of his own commentary on a previous code, the Torah. and it's a lot of halachot. And so the Mishnah Brewer is from our time, Yisrael Mager Kagan. He is the Mishnah Brewer rabbi from the early 1920s. And it provides, I guess, like an elaboration of the code, but also provides a little bit of commentary. And I think the way that he describes Kiddush, which is like why initially this appeared in Masachet Shava, because we're talking about the creation story in our Kiddush. We also talk about our creation. The Kiddush on Friday night is the end of the whole creation story by Yafu Hashemayim V'Aretz, like God finally finished, right? Like Hakol, it was all there, the heavens and the earth. And we read on Friday night because that's what happened on the first ever Friday night. And so that's why it came up initially in Masachet Shabbat. So now I want to see a little bit more about the rules of how we do that Kiddush. And I wonder if it can help us think a little bit differently or more interesting based off of the content we just saw. Okay, so what does he say? I'll do Hebrew and then we'll explain. So what the Shulchan Aruch told us, and this is the part we're about to commentate on, is that you say Vayachu Hashemayim V'Aretz standing up, right? We saw a lot of standing up before. So maybe have that in mind. Why do we say it's standing up? Let's find out. Shehu edut al briat shamayim va'aretz ve'edut ba'inan me'umad. Okay, so this is actually, we're not just standing up because it's like nice, respectful stand up. It's a kind of testimony to stand up on a Friday night and create and do Kiddush. We are witnessing the creation of the sky and the earth, and we always do witnessing testimony standing up. That's how it works. That's like a legal point, but also I guess shows like the beauty, the respect. If you remember all the way back at the beginning of the Parsha, we saw that we were saying the Bnei Israel as an entity, a singular entity, stands up when presenting judgment to Moshe. Okay. And not only do you say it, but if you say it in tefillah, because in the Mariv evening prayer on Friday night, we say Vayachu all together as a community, Vayachu Hashemayim V'Aretz. We say it right before we have the like summarized repetition of the Amidah. Even if you said it then, you say it again when you come home at Kiddush, because you want to make sure the kids hear it, which is good. I mean, why weren't the kids at shul? I mean, that's a silly question. We obviously know it's a little difficult to get to shul on Friday night, but you want to make sure that they hear it also. Okay, that was from the tour. That was from that previous legal text. And not only that, the Rokeach, who is also a medieval halachic commentator, he brings the name of Midrash. You don't just say Vayachulu at shul and then also at home. You can even say it like 3 times, sort of 3 times. Achad batfila, silently on your own, you should be saying it. B'chad lachar tefillah, after the tefillah, and then b'chad al kos. Also, when you get home, you have your Kiddush cup, you should say it on the cup. Because achronim de'im shachach lomar shichech lomar v'yachulu b'shat kiddush amro be'emtza suda. And later rabbinic commentators say that not only is it so important that like you say those 3 times, if you forgot to say it in Kiddush, it's important enough that you interrupt your meal in the middle and you take the cup and you do Vayachu then. You should not go through the meal without saying it. And if you forgot it, too bad. It's important to invoke. Suda alakos, that's when you bring in the cup. So I'm curious, why the question is like, why would it be so significant, right? Like, I don't know how often people are thinking about Vayachu. I'm often thinking about like, oh, this is like what I need in order to eat my Shabbat meal and I'm very hungry. So I'm not necessarily thinking about the meaning behind it, but what would be so important about saying these terms, and also then the witnessing level? What are we witnessing and why is it so significant? Does anyone have any thoughts about that? Does anyone want to go before Barry shares?
Please.
Go for it, Barry. And if anyone wants to share, please feel free.
Please jump in now if you have anything. All right. I come back to this repetitively. It's not the only time I've thought of this. And the other thoughts I have that are stray are not nearly as frequent to me as this. And that is, we are, it's like, well, the name, Kedusha, and there's a Parsha, Kadoshim. We are in God's image. as we were told, and that's the best of us. And we're supposed to be that. And that's the right way to start Shabbos and embrace it. And just as God brought Shabbat to us at the first Friday night, as you said, Sophia, it's now we're bringing it to ourselves and our families, and he who leads the kiddush, or who the person who leads the kiddush, like I'm honored to do in my family. We're bringing it to the table. We're bringing it to ourselves, and we're doing what we said we would do, and we were doing what we commanded to do, and that is, this is it. We're with God. We're doing this. We're embracing the Shabbat just like God brought it to us.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. That's fantastic. Anyone else have anything you want to share?
I'm wondering, I'm guessing,
Hello.
I haven't
Yes.
really, hi. I haven't really thought about it so much, but I'm wondering if we're connecting back to kind of, speaking of Parsha Utro, actually, Sophia, you have to tell me which one. Is it Shamor or Zachor in Yitro?
Oh, I think it's
Abba says it's Zachor. Okay.
It's Zachor.
There we go. But I'm wondering if remembering and timing and, and recognition of day and night, remembering Breshit, witnessing somehow that it's bringing us back to not just the calculation of day and night and kind of the mechanics of that, but maybe it's some kind of some connection, attestment to the very beginnings and foundations.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Right, so what Dr. Freudenstein is referencing is, right, we also have the 10 Commandments, and in one version in Shemot, we have Zachor, et Yom HaShabbat, you should remember to keep Shabbat, and then in Dvarim, when we have it again, it's Shamor. It means to guard. So then there's a whole discussion. What's the difference between remembering and guarding? That's why we also, the Midrash and also in Lachadodi, Shamor v'Zachor v'Dibur Echad, that both of those were kind of said at the same time. That's to explain the discrepancy. But yeah, it seems like remembering and then guarding are different kind of modes. And actually, this one is the Zachor. All the positive commandments of Hilchot Shabbat are often put in the Zachor category. And Shamor, we have to be careful, guard. That sounds like we want to make sure we're not doing any of the negative prohibitions. So, right, the idea is like, what exactly are we remembering? Like, why is that so important? I think on Shabbat, right, like remembering where we came from, our foundations, like God rested, so to us. That makes sense. And I think that also remembering where we come from helps us, I guess, ground us, right? Like to say like, oh, I have all these issues in my life, but like, let's think about like what it's really all about. And then I think that this is, so that's something we do on Shabbat, but then also then bringing it into like the role of the courts and like the in judgment that we see ourselves as partners in the divine, and in remembering what the world was. I think that adds like a level of gravitas to judgment, and reminds us not to get lost in the weeds and to say like, well, what are we doing this for? Like it's a kind of grounding of purpose. To me, the idea of like standing witness to the world or like the sky and the land just feels like, I don't know, like you're on a nature walk and you're like seeing the beauty of the universe. That can be an opportunity to feel grounded and remember like what's really important out there, and like all the different things socially and communally that might be difficult to remember, like where is God really speaking to us? So I think that bringing all of that is just a kind of calibration. And also that's like what it is in judgment too. Something else I'll add, and then please, if anyone else has anything to share, I'd love to hear, but I'll share a little bit personally from my life. So I'm studying for smicha now, which means that like I'm someone who is studying how to discern law and Torah for people. And my teacher, Jeffrey Fox, always talks to us about how there's always a world behind the question that someone asks. So like if someone is asking a question about, did my meat fork fall into the dairy sink and like what's the deal with that, like it could just be like a nitty-gritty question, but maybe there's a whole world behind it. Maybe this person comes to halacha or kashrut at a later stage in life, and I guess like the potential like concern about what it means, like has a different resonance based off of their social situation, or maybe they're in the home of a family member that doesn't necessarily keep kosher. Like there's always these questions, all these things we have to dig and find out, is this like merely a black and white, like fun halachic question? Or is there a lot more going on socially, spiritually, emotionally? And we need to view every single question as a world in and of itself. So to me, when I see this desire of trying to connect back to the creation of the world when thinking about judgment, that's what I think as like, that is the power of being a partner in that process, is saying that providing a halachic answer isn't just because we want to like know halacha. Like, I mean, that's great, but often it's about creating and enabling a world for that person. And so it's important to then bear witness to what they're bringing to you and kind of taking that seriously, that they're standing in front of you, presenting their qualms. And so it's the job of the judge to listen, or to the halachic decider to listen, and to take that in very seriously and bear witness to their experience. Sometimes people ask halachic questions and they really just want someone to hear them out. I mean, this is also like comes out in therapy discussions. Like sometimes it's not about problem solving, but they just want someone to bear witness to what they're experiencing when they're standing in front of you, to take them fully in as they are. And I think that's what a lot of this discussion is about, bringing the creation of the world, and in the significance of standing. Like I think there's a gravitas to it that gets added. So unless anyone has anything else to share, I have one more source for us. This is a source that I think connects to what we're talking about. I really liked it. I heard it on a podcast recently, so I wanted to talk about it. So maybe the connection is a little bit weak, but hopefully you'll appreciate it too. This is a podcast called On Being with Krista Tippett. It's through NPR. Krista Tippett interviews all of these different people about spirituality. And what's really cool about it is like she interviews religious leaders, like Rabbi Sachs was on there, Aviva Zornberg was on there. Like those are like stereotypical religious leaders. But then she also talks to people who are scientists and musicians. And there was one person who that is the reason that it does bird watching, and like talks about like what is the theology and the spirituality behind that. So it's a wide-ranging audience. It's like not necessarily strictly religious, but it's spiritual. And this person that they interviewed, Hanif Abdurakib, he is a jazz musician. And they were talking about the spiritual significance of jazz, which I thought was really interesting. He's also a culture critic. And he talks a lot about the nature of the audience becoming a cohesive whole. When in a theater we've never met before, and then all of a sudden like we become this symbiotic like organism, and like has that happen, which is really cool. And so he talks a little bit about that, and it made me think about both about judgment, but also about this week's Parsha, because we also are witnesses to Revelation at Sinai. And here's the source. So he says, "I'm such an audience watcher because, be it for films or for concerts, I really love seeing how people are impacted and affected through a moment of shared witnessing. And that compels me and brings me closer to what feels like a type of emotional salvation." So I thought this source, I mean, I think it's gorgeous, and we can talk about like why that is. But what I like about this source is that, you know, I'm speaking as like a future halachic decisor judge about why all of this is meaningful. But what I think he does really well, what Hanif Abdurakib does here, is he explains how this idea of like of witnessing, and then therefore like as like a judge being like accepting of that witnessing, is something that we can all do. We don't have to be in court in order to do that well. There are lots of times in our lives where we have shared witnessing. Someone comes to us, a friend, a confidant, and shares something with us, or sometimes even random strangers. We all do this act of shared witnessing together. And not only that, I think what he does really well here with saying that it's a type of emotional salvation is recognizing the power of witnessing. Talking about that gravitas, right? Like it could be like, oh my gosh, like it just reminds me how amazing the world is, how amazing God is, and we're partners in creation. But that also like recognizing that we have that power to like properly listen to people, witness them, that's a kind of salvation in and of itself, taking a person in for who they are and taking their questions that they come and ask as a whole world within each question. That's a kind of emotional salvation. there's a human desire to want to be seen by other people, right? It doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, somebody needs to like see what I look like, but to be understood. And so the idea that we are bearing witness to others, and that can provide a kind of salvation in doing that most people just want to be seen. And that's really what this is all about, I think, is a really beautiful way to be seeing the world, and kind of democratizes, and in a funny way, very similar to how Yitro recommends to Moshe, that we should be democratizing the judgment system. It doesn't have to be just Moshe. There can be lots of different judges that get involved and help other people. Hopefully this like democratizing of witnessing can help us feel like we can bring this idea of witnessing and judging into our own lives, whether it be that we're saying Kiddush every Friday night, or also just in the way that people approach us and thinking about what's the world behind the question that they're asking and the power of what it means to really witness others. So hopefully we can take all of that into our Parsha Utro experience, the witnessing that comes with judging another person, or also even the witnessing, the shared witnessing we had at Matan Torah that we were all a part of. Hopefully this can be a meaningful understanding of what's going on there for you. Any final thoughts before we log off for the night?
Yes.
Hi, Marilyn.
At the beginning of the class, you were talking about Moshe having people stand all day long to see him. It reminds me of these doctors that go to Africa or something, and everybody in the village is standing in line to be seen by the doctor. I'm sure that Moshe did not have to ask God every single question that people asked him, because I'm sure he would have had the same questions over and over again.
Yeah, I'm sure. So, how many times can an ox gore another ox? Or I don't know what issues they were trying, but you're right. I'm sure there was definitely repetition, which definitely explains and like justifies why Yitro would want to kind of streamline this process at the Dvarim Kalim. The Dvar Katan goes to them, the small issues that Moshe doesn't have to deal with. But yeah, that image of the doctor, it's very sad, but also powerful. That like, isn't it cool? I don't know, the idea of like all these people were like standing and waiting to hear Torah from Moshe. It could be like, they wanted like some arbitration, but how have I don't know. Is that like, I don't see any lineups out of the synagogue anytime soon. So it's like an interesting image that way. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Barry, go for it.
Got a couple of observations. One is Yitro, repeating my earlier comment about my background being privileged to study a Chumash that has linear translations in English and then Rashi commentary with linear translations in English, because I'm an English guy. My Hebrew is next to none. That being said, Rashi comments, and I bought into this in recent years after having seen it a few times, but now I buy into it, that Yitro, back at the time that Moshe comes to Midian in fleeing from Egypt, and he draws the water for the daughters of Yitro and flocks of Yitro, and how Yitro was, the daughters were not respectfully treated or greeted and whatnot. And there's commentary that Yitro bolted from his idolatry, which to me means he was a kind of Abraham kind of character in his family, and left his people's idolatry to seek something more lasting and more powerful, like the oneness of God. So I think Yitro was contemplating this. I think that ties into why Moshe was introduced to Yitro's family at that point in the Torah, and why he gets to marry Tzipporah, because they weren't. I buy into the fact that maybe they weren't idolaters anymore. So Moshe was actually getting into a righteous kind of family within an idolatrous society, because Yitro didn't move away. And so now Yitro, having been a leader of a people, especially an idolatrous people, and bolting from that, and still being a righteous man in his family and keeping his family together, his daughters, and staying his course. He comes to Moshe at this point in Torah, whatever the chronology is, he comes to Moshe at this point with experience to bring this to the table. And I think he's a fitting character to bring this to the table. And Yitro, he shows his overall humanity. He brings his daughter Tzipporah and Moshe's children with him and brings them to them. Moshe apparently didn't send for them. Moshe apparently didn't know they were coming. And here Yitro is bringing them. And Moshe and Yitro greet, and Moshe then gets to greet his wife and children. And it's like there's a bonding there. There's a connection that is not written in the words, that's not plain on its face in the text. So I'm seeing all this. So Yitro, I think, is a valid bringer of these connections, of these critiques and suggestions to bring us a fitting judicial society, if you will. And so it makes sense to me that this is going on. And then Moshe, who thought he was kind of, except for Aaron, Moshe feeling he was alone, in anticipation of receiving Torah. We saw that in the shared witnessing here. The other thought of mine was shared witnessing was profound at the Sea of Reeds when it parted. We were desperate. We were scared. And Moshe's praying to God, according to commentary. And God says, get up. My people are in distress. Our people are in distress. I'll do my job. You take care of them. And then God tells him how to take care of it. Put your staff over the water and the water will divide. And it does, right? And across we go. And to such a shared witnessing profundity that we sing in spite of all this mass destruction of the Egyptian army and the horses and riders and et cetera, that we sing. And God doesn't let the angels sing, but he lets us sing because we've shared this experience with each other, and we're going to do it again at Choreb. And so it's just a remarkable privilege that we have. It's a remarkable responsibility and burden that we have, and it's a great blessing no matter how you cut it. So I think that all this stuff comes together for me. It's hard for me to verbalize it clearly, but it comes together for me.
Perfect. Yeah, I feel similar about some of the sources. Like, not everything is like doesn't follow me like in the most linearly these sources, but I see that there's like a mixture of like witnessing, judging, creation, shared experience, and like somehow they all work together.
So they all belong.
Yeah. Any last final thoughts from anyone? Okay, well, I'll stop sharing my screen. Thank you everyone for coming this evening. And hopefully we'll see you all next week. And yeah, thank you for our own experience of some shared witnessing of Torah. And yeah, see you next week.
You did very well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shkoach, everybody.
Have a good night.
Night.